Good morning. Thank you. My name is Casey Hardin. I'm the founder and CEO of Conservatorio S.A. Today, I have the pleasure of presenting Conservatorio's vision for a family of publicly traded real estate investment funds in Panama. And I say the pleasure because we've been working on this for a number of years, and because we feel that the vision for the fund, the family of funds, aligns very well with the vision and mission of the Bolsa de Valores de Panama, which is to increase the number of sustainable investments and also to promote the wider distribution of publicly traded shares in Panama. Before I get into the details of the fund itself, I want to talk a little bit about Conservatorio because we'll be the manager of the fund. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about our business philosophy and our history. We are a real estate development company, but we also consider ourselves a finance platform, and we also consider ourselves a real estate innovation platform. We have 15 years experience in Panama, and so our roots are deeply rooted in Panama, but now our branches extend through Central America and up into Mexico. Our model, we call it sustainable urban revitalization, has been the subject of case studies at Center for Real Estate at MIT in Boston, and also at the Said School of Business in Oxford. And it's also been recognized by international foundations and publications. In Panama, we're probably best known for our restorations of historic buildings. We've completed more than 20 buildings in the last 15 years. And in those buildings is a wide range of asset types. We've done hotels, apartments, commercial, office, but it hasn't been just that wide range of types. We've also done a lot of levels of product. We've done five-star hotels like the American Trade and hotels de mochilero, backpacker hotels, and we've done hotels in the middle like Las Clementinas. We've done apartments, some of the most expensive apartments in the city, but we've also done some of the most affordable apartments, starting at $33,000 when we first started doing social housing in Casco Viejo. We're actually, the majority of the units we deliver are below $120,000, located in the center of the city. And this mix of products and levels is really in Conservatorio's DNA, because we believe that cities should be inclusive, not exclusive. We are a certified B Corporation. We're one of the few in Central America, but there's quite a few, and there's very prestigious B Corps around the world. If you don't know about B Corp certification, it's a certification of high standards of sustainability and governance. I think historically, sustainability was sort of lumped in the category perhaps of corporate social responsibility or corporate charity. That is no longer the case. And I think it's very important to touch on that point. In 2019, flows of funds to sustainable investments went mainstream. They quadrupled to $200 billion. And in 2020, in June, flows of funds to sustainable investments hit $200 billion halfway through the year. So it's very likely that they will double this year. In other words, sustainable investing has gone mainstream. It's growing exponentially. Investors like BlackRock, I'm sure you're all familiar, is the largest asset manager in the world, see sustainability not merely through the lens of responsibility, but they see it as the foundation of building their clients' portfolios in the future. Because as that quote from Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, says, the risk-adjusted returns going forward, they believe, will simply be better than traditional investments. And I get the question a lot, and I think it's a natural question, isn't that just a luxury for developed countries? And the answer is no, it's the reverse. The performance of sustainable investments in emerging markets is far better, has been far better than the performance of traditional companies. This is a MSCI index, but there's a lot of other indexes and studies that will show you the same thing. And this outperformance is even greater in emerging markets than it has been in developed markets. There are a lot of theories about why this is. Probably has to do with a combination of better control of risks through better governance, perhaps better efficiency of resource usage, maybe better attraction and retention of talent. I know that's been the case for us. And changing preferences of consumers who are preferring to buy sustainable goods. All of those are having effect in driving this outperformance. I would add that in my experience, companies that are prioritizing sustainability are essentially prioritizing innovation and change management. In other words, there is no librito that gives every company in every industry a path to sustainability. So companies that are doing this well are really innovating well, and it could be that that capacity to innovate is giving them a competitive advantage throughout their businesses. So what does this have to do with real estate? How does this apply to urban development? How does this apply to our model of sustainable urban revitalization? I think to understand that, the easiest way to understand that is just to look at the urban challenges that Panama City and really every city in Latin America is facing. Latin America is the most highly urbanized region of the world. So most of our problems, I think it's fair to say, are somehow related to the urban context. And there's a chain of problems. This is not all of them, but this is some of the key problems. And I think we'll all recognize them. Perhaps it starts with deterioration of the núcleo urbano, which started many years ago. So deteriorated infrastructure, deteriorated public services, and just deteriorated quality of life in general. As people started to move outside the city, it created a urban sprawl, dispersión urbana. And it just enlarged the huella urbana, the territory over which governments had to provide services. Tubería, calles, policía, escuela, all of those public services get much more expensive when you have to provide them over a very large huella urbana. So no area actually receives the amount of public budget that it should. This huge huella urbana obviously causes an overdependence in the automobile. Panama is an interesting case, and it's not unusual. 70% of the work in Panama is inside Panama Centro, but only 2% of the affordable housing is in Panama Centro. So this causes a deterioration of quality of life for people who have to commute 2 to 4 hours a day. And it also causes, obviously, an unnecessarily large environmental impact. And all of these things taken together aggravate that series of vicious social cycles that we all know. Those social cycles tend to just stay and reside in marginalized neighborhoods where there's neither pressure nor presupuesto to resolve them. What does this have to do with real estate? In Conservatorio, we believe that public policy and urban planning are extraordinarily important. But we also believe that the real estate industry has a responsibility to look for ways to develop profitably, but also sustainably. In our case, our response has been to simply try to make the city more compact with our development, to create small districts that support a more walkable quality of life, where the car is optional, because residents can satisfy their basic needs walking. Within 15 minutes, they should be able to do everything they need to do in a day. This type of urbanism has a lot of interesting side effects. Mixing incomes and mixing uses not only makes the city more compact, but it tends to build a sense of identity and community. We found that our buyers very often will give up one or both cars, and that frees up presupuesto familiar, which in many cases they spend not only on increasing their quality of life and housing, but they'll also spend on education. So we think that there is a long-term multiplier effect tied to better urbanism. This type of this approach is translated into a sustainable and profitable business model for us. One example, this is a project that is under construction in Santa Ana. It's called La Quince. It's 5 buildings, which work together as a small mini district. 62% of the apartments are below $120,000, which means that they can essentially be bought by a minimum wage couple, a couple earning just over minimum wage. But the most affordable apartment is $79,000, which makes it one of the most affordable apartments in the entire Panama Centro. The most expensive apartment is $340,000. So there's a wide range of niveles socioeconómicos, and we think that's a healthy thing. The project is obviously in a walkable area. There's a supermarket around the corner. Pretty much anything anybody needs to do within their day can be done in 15 minutes, and there's public transportation right there. The metro is less than 1,000 meters away. There's a bus stop in front. The project's anchored by cultural space and and it's built to international standards. And it's anchored by cultural and social programs. So this is an extremely important piece of how we look at how a neighborhood should be. Why this is profitable for us brings us to our first fund. That project has ground floor retail that, because of the walkability, is a very sustainable and solid type of retail. And we, over the years, have built buildings that we've almost never sold our retail. So that's a characteristic of our business model. And as a result, we have about 18,000 square meters of retail situated in clusters throughout the neighborhood. And there's 2 reasons why we typically don't sell the retail. One is because it's simply, we see it as the corte más fino del carne. We see it as a type of property that has an intrinsic value that people will buy. They value it for its aesthetic. They value it almost as a collector's item, but it also has a commercial value because of the pedestrian flow. And the other reason is that we're able to create value through having a bigger portfolio, because we're able to curate and create synergies among tenants. A quick example of that, this is a project we finished a couple of years ago called El Colegio. It has on the ground floor a museum, a restaurant, and a Felipe Mota. The museum obviously can pay a little bit less than the restaurant and the liquor store, but they're complementary. People come from outside to go to the museum, they end up going to dinner, and vice versa. And people from the neighborhood go to the Felipe Mota for their daily needs. This makes it a little street with an identity, and it allows us to create a more sustainable mix of uses and give the neighborhood and give people from outside the neighborhood a reason to come back. Part of our retail strategy has always been variable rents, and post-COVID, we're going almost exclusively to variable rents. This is an extremely important part of what we want to do, and it's worked out very well for us in the past. The reason we do it is because, as you can see from this graph, there's a lot of variability and seasonality in our tenants, but our tenants sell things that at the high end are always in demand, and even in the lowest season still are good sellers. We charge between 2 and 20% of the gross rents. Depending on the margins of the business and what they can handle, we use minimums, but they're soft minimums. In other words, if tenants aren't able to meet their minimums over a period of months, we have the ability to terminate, but ultimately we're not making them accumulate debts that they cannot pay. And this makes us a very active manager. We are constantly engaged with our tenants, looking for how we can help them increase their revenues. To date, our results with this formula have been very good. We've kept a very high level of occupancy, probably due to the variability. We lost some occupancy due to COVID, but we think we lost a lot less occupancy than other landlords who base their models on fixed rents, which are unsustainable even sometimes in the best of times for tenants. Certainly when there's stress, it's unsustainable. Many of our tenants are independent, and they tend to have a very high satisfaction. So they tend not to leave us because we so actively engage with them and try to help them build their businesses. That's allowed us to keep a fairly steady growth rate of incomes. Our fund structure is quite straightforward. The investors will be owners of the assets, which means they get not only the income from the assets, but the capital gains after a 10% withholding tax, which is the only tax in the entire chain. The fund is managed by Conservatorio, but overseen by a board of directors, which is also overseen by the Superintendencia de Mercado de Valores. And the fund assets will consist of the retail, which, as I mentioned, has a variable rent, but also some apartments and offices, which have fixed rent and provide a little bit of rent stability. We believe in a very low debt approach. In fact, part of our reason for going public now is to reduce debt. We don't have much, but we'll get it down to almost nothing. We'll put a ceiling of 25% debt on the portfolio. In practice, we hope we probably will never get to the 25%. We'll use debt tactically. In other words, maybe for acquisitions or for improvements to buildings. But the idea is that this is a very safe investment where investors have their capital protected. Our goal is 7 to 9% a year total shareholder return. But again, that's with very little leverage. So we would recommend this, and we look at this investment as a very conservative investment. There will be volatility in the income. That 7 to 9% will be made up between capital appreciation and dividends. In the beginning, it'll be more capital appreciation than dividends. So it's not a fixed income vehicle, it's a variable income vehicle, but it gives investors exposure directly to the sales of the retailers principally. I think it's a fair question to ask why now. And I'll just briefly mention that we think that this has been our plan for a long time, but we think, to twist a little bit the words of Charles Dickens, sometimes the worst of times is the best of times. We think that there's going to be opportunities for acquisition, and that publicly traded shares will give us possibilities for acquisitions that we wouldn't have otherwise. We're conscious that, as this graph shows, after 2008, while there was a dip in asset values, the recovery of highly walkable areas, both in the central business districts and the suburban areas, was faster and ultimately resulted in an interesting, larger spread than prior to the crisis. We think something similar may happen after COVID. We're also excited that the government has been investing disproportionately in the historic center of the city. They're really seeing it as an expanding district. We want to align our investments with the government investment. We think that helps to improve quality of life, helps improve quality of infrastructure, obviously, and it helps promote the area overall. And the last reason really has nothing to do with Casco Viejo. It's what we see as a potential for REITs in Panama. At this moment, there's about $1 billion of REITs publicly traded. The expert recommendations tend to be a weighting of 5 to 15% for investor portfolios. So using the $34 billion of funds and investment portfolios in Panama, we think there's a lot of room for growth for REITs in Panama. But to get there, the industry has to professionalize. So our commitment to investors are 8 pillars that we think are what set us apart, but we also hope that other REITs who enter the market will adopt these pillars. First one is active and professional management, not only that understands finance, but also that understands real estate and how to create value in real estate. The second is a coherent strategy based on a coherent market thesis and very clear transparency into the risks and benefits for investors. The third is dividends and capital gains. We don't think REITs should be fixed income. They're a different animal. They should actually allow investors to have an inflation hedge, so they need to give exposure to the asset itself. Diversification, we think that you need a range of tenants, multi-payers, and even multi-asset classes. Good governance and social responsibility. Industry standard, first-rate technology. NAVs based on cash flow, not based on appraisals, or not solely based on appraisals. Investors should understand management's projections for future cash flow based on historic cash flows, and that should give the NAV. And finally, shares quoted on the Bolsa. I would love to say liquidity here, and that is our goal, is to create increasing liquidity. I know that's a challenge in Panama, but that's a challenge that we as a fund will undertake. We're a team of 22. We have a fantastic executive team and board of directors has deep experience, not only in real estate, but also finance, law, operations, and construction. And we've been able to build a great group of strategic partners over the years who help us to deliver on our promise to investors. How can investors participate? The first way is that we, at the end of this year, will do our IPO, our first emisión. We're looking for larger investors at first who will come in early and accompany us through the post-COVID recovery period. We have a pricing mechanism that will ensure fair pricing as we get more visibility into how businesses recover post-COVID. For investors who are interested in that, we have 2 presentations. One is in Spanish on the 11th of November. Another one is in English on the 17th of November. The other way that investors might want to participate, and this is probably a more limited group, but if there are investors who have assets in or around Casco Antiguo in the historic district, performing assets, perhaps we can discuss, or that perhaps it'd be interesting to some of those asset owners, contribution to those assets. It might give them flexibility to deal with debt that they wouldn't have otherwise, flexibility to partially exit their investment, and obviously it might be a more efficient and flexible solution to investing in Casco Viejo for those asset owners. So if you're interested in participating in either one of those ways, please email us, info@sur.fund. Thank you, and with that, I open up to questions.
Muchas gracias, Casey, por tu presentación. Vamos a tener ahora un periodo de preguntas y respuestas. Pueden seguir haciendo sus preguntas en la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Como moderadora de esta sección nos acompaña Lercy Batista, gerente general de Central Latinoamericana de Valores. Bienvenida, Lercy.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Gracias, Acer. Hello, good morning.
Hola, Lercy.
Thank you, Casey Hardin, co-founder of Sustainable Urban Revitalization Fund by Conservatorio, for this excellent and very rich presentation. As you mentioned, sustainable investment offers the opportunity to participate in profitable business models that have a great positive impact on the environment and the social development. It is a great opportunity for Panama to become a center of sustainable investments in Latin America. Well, we have some questions in English and in Spanish, Casey. Let me start. La primera.
Cualquiera está en video.
¿Tienen una idea de la tasa de retorno que va a tener este fondo en Casco Antiguo y si hay algún periodo de retención de la inversión?
Correcto. La tasa, como mencioné, 7 a 9% es nuestro meta. Sería una combinación de dividendos y ganancia de capital. Y otra vez es con muy bajo apalancamiento. Lo menciono porque a veces hay inversionistas que tienen acceso a capital mucho más barata que hasta la nuestra y ellos deciden apalancar sus inversiones por su lado. Entonces el 7-9 es un 7-9 muy seguro, es decir que hay muy poco apalancamiento, pero las inversionistas siempre tienen sus opciones. En periodo de retención, los inversionistas iniciales que estamos buscando, queremos que ellos nos acompañen 12 a 18 meses, depende de la recuperación de COVID, y queremos estar muy seguros antes que empezamos a distribuir las acciones a inversionistas más pequeños, más retail. Queremos estabilizar el historial de pago de dividendos. Entonces, probablemente entre 12 y 18 meses sería el lock-up period.
Súper, muy bien. Nos siguen llegando preguntas, Amazing Project, sobre cuánto hay para invertir. Estamos viendo, pues, interesante tu presentación, Casey. En otro aspecto nos preguntan, ¿cuáles son los proyectos primeros a desarrollar por ustedes?
Bueno, el fondo mismo no va a desarrollar. Esa es otra cosa que quizás no enfaticé. El fondo SURF-K es un fondo de propiedades en operación. Entonces, no tiene el riesgo de desarrollo. Es un fondo donde las propiedades ya están desarrolladas y generan rentas. Pero diciendo eso, Conservatorio S.A., el inmobiliario, sigue desarrollando. En Santa Ana tenemos proyectos también en exposición y estamos viendo en otras áreas de la ciudad.
Okay. Interesante. Do you see Conservatorio's sustainable model apply in other sectors of Panama?
Absolutely. The idea of a distrito verde, of a green district, is an idea that we think can work in many areas. There's many brownfield sites around the city, especially near the metro, that we think really should be looked at with this type of development.
Super, muy bien. Nos dicen, what opportunities do you see in Panama for real estate funds after COVID-19?
I actually think that COVID-19, we're obviously going to be under a lot of economic stress as a country, but it's providing a ability for real estate funds that start now to get solid valuations underneath them that may not have been possible in years past. And I think that makes it safer for investors to enter this asset class now.
Okay. Nos preguntan también, ¿qué objetivo de captación tienen ustedes estimados en el IPO?
Entre 10 y 12 millones.
Ok, súper. Interesante. Nosotros la experiencia con ustedes muy gratificante de que tuvimos conversaciones iniciales hace algunos años y tenerlos aquí próximamente a estrenarse nos complace muchísimo. Nos siguen llegando preguntas, pero ya no tenemos más espacio para las mismas, así que vamos a hacer una última pregunta para finalizar el panel. Dice, ¿cuál es el tiquete mínimo para entrar en la inversión?
La presentación del 11 de noviembre va a discutir los mínimos y todas las condiciones. Entonces, recomiendo que inversiones que tienen interés nos acompañen para esa presentación.
Súper, bueno, muchísimas gracias, Casey, nuevamente de parte de la Bolsa de Valores por acompañarnos. Gracias a todos y estamos interesados porque se queden en nuestra presentación para las próximas ponencias. Nuevamente, Casey Hardin, co-founder de Sustainable Urban Revitalization Fund by Conservatorio. Gracias por acompañarnos. Tengan excelente día a todos.
Gracias, Leslie.